Wake up, everybody. It's time for the History You Forgot podcast, the podcast where three veteran teachers with over 90 years of teaching experience help remind you of the stuff you slept through when you were in high school. And guess what? We've got another episode of World War II. So it's World War II Part 2 coming at you next. I'm Jason Schmoida.
I'm Jason Jones.
And I'm Jeff Breedlove. Welcome to part 2 of the World War II podcast. If you...
I like part 2.
Part 2. Electric great movie at part 2. Yeah, so I just have this image in my brain. So yeah, if you were with us last time, which we know you all were, we decided to call halfway through, right, our podcast for World War II. Kind of got us into the war a little bit, but now we're going to kind of finish it and talk a little bit about the impact. So I think we have, as you clearly can tell, like it's a whole different day. It's a whole different, I mean, we've taken off our sweatshirts. So, and we fixed another drink. Mr. Jones, what are we drinking now?
Well, we are drinking a drink called the Armored Diesel. The Armored Diesel is not a WWE wrestler, but instead was General Patton's
That's right.
favorite drink.
Nice.
Okay, and if you know American war history, you know Patton was a famous U.S. general.
Mm-hmm.
It has bourbon, which is shocking that we're drinking a bourbon drink.
We may need to switch it up. We had a gin to bourbon last time.
Right.
Yeah.
It also has bitters, some cherry juice, and some lemon juice. It's got a little bit of a different flavor, but it's good. It's
Armored,
good.
again?
Armored Diesel.
And I'm surprised a little bit by the orange sort of look to it, but
Which would be
Must
the
be the
cherry
cherry
juice.
juice.
yeah, the cherry juice and the lemon
And I
juice
want to know how
together.
come yours is so small.
Because I didn't want to short you guys.
That's ice.
So not shorting
All
us.
right.
That's right. Here we
So
go.
World War II part 2.
Good.
So I think, hold on a second.
No, you got
I didn't drink. Shimoda, let's go ahead and start
recap.
off with a little bit of recap. We kind of got through the 1942-ish. Right?
Yeah.
The U.S. had entered the war. Europe is sort of at fully out war. And Pearl Harbor has been bombed. So the U.S. is, clearly, and we're talking about the Neutrality Acts.
Yeah.
I think how the U.S. kind of got lulled into this.
Well, we had set it up as, at that point, you had the Allied front. The first Allied front that the Americans participated in was North Africa. And eventually they would jump to Italy, and eventually we will have France. So just kind of setting up what we're going to talk about there today. And then on the Eastern Front, you have the Soviets. Right. And, Stalin's not going to be real happy with having that front to himself, but that's part of the storyline for sure. In the Pacific, the whole second war to this thing, the United States had been drawn in by Pearl Harbor. And at that point in time, we were just completely devastated for about 6 months, to be honest with you. I have a map that I like to show when I was teaching in class, and it would show the extent of Japanese control, and it drew this huge circle
sphere.
into China, Manchuria, all the way down to Southeast Asia.
Part of the U.S.
All of it. All of it, right.
Almost to Australia, except not then.
Yeah,
but they were bombing Australia.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's key because the two most obvious, big players in this eventually could be the United States to the east of all that, and then Australia to the south.
Right.
So you really have in 1942 two important battles that sort of create a turning point in the Pacific, at least for the United States war in the Pacific. At Midway, which is going to stop that eastern move of the Japanese, where the United States won. I have some stories about that. But the other addition to that,
map.
I know, we need the map. And another addition to that is the Battle of the Coral Sea. And the Battle of the Coral Sea is super important because it's just north of Australia, and it will prevent the Japanese invasion of Australia. And, I always think, just imagine if the Japanese were able to control Australia and use that as a base of operations. Right. It may be a game changer.
Well, and I know we all have a personal connection here, but my grandfather on my dad's side fought in the Battle of the Coral Sea. Right? In the Navy. And I know you guys have some connections as well.
Yeah. My grandmother's second husband, so sort of my dad's stepdad, fought at Midway.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to do a shameless plug here.
A one up.
Yeah, I'm not
A dollar and a one up.
I'm never trying to one up you guys.
Yeah,
But
but this is good. This is a good one.
yeah, it's kind of cool. My grandpa Jones fought from Midway all the way to the Japanese islands, and then after the war, he was contacted by Henry Fonda.
Yeah.
Henry Fonda was in a movie called Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts was the character. Mr. Roberts was Henry Fonda. It was made up of 3 men, and my grandfather Jones, Alfred Jones, was one of the 3 men. They were on what my grandpa always kind of called, and he wouldn't talk much about the war, but an attack supply ship.
Yeah.
All right. So it was a supply ship, but it did have a few guns on it. It wasn't definitely not leading into the battles, but anyway, Henry Fonda came to Osceola, Iowa, spent a weekend with my grandfather, and then and with 2 other men in other places in the country to create this character. And so that's always kind of been the Hollywood claim to fame.
I watched the movie.
Yeah, Mr. Roberts.
But I've never seen it. Yeah.
If you're a Henry Fonda fan,
100%. How can you not be Henry Fonda?
Right.
I guess there's reasons not to be, but we'll get into it.
You should have
episode.
You should have that on cassette.
That's right. That's right.
You should have like hundreds of copies. You should hand those out on USB.
Should hand those
That's
out.
great.
Yeah.
Well, and those were important. I mean, literally preventing the Japanese from moving further into the Pacific towards the United States and preventing them from taking Australia. Those are huge battles, and they did stop that.
And I think it's obviously we understand the importance of Australia, but what was the importance of Midway? Well, Midway was a set of islands that had a runway. And they believed if they could control that runway, they could bomb the west coast of the United States.
Not that we're going to go too far, but I do believe they bombed the Aleutian Islands a little bit, right? Some of those islands, and there was even like a errant, like Portland, Oregon.
Okay, here's how I've heard
hot air balloon or something.
I'm going to say with a grain of salt for sure, because I can't verify that, but I've always heard that story was the Japanese were experimenting with using weather balloons to guide and drop bombs, and somehow they were able to get to, was it northern Oregon maybe?
Something,
and a bomb dropped from a weather balloon.
Like a family of 4 or something at the time, right? Like the only sort of victims of Japanese bombing.
I'm not even sure if anyone died.
I'm not
the way I've heard this, but again, if you know, let us know.
Well,
comment and let us know, right?
Just also the Aleutian Islands, to make sure everybody understands, that's the islands off of Africa. So they are U.S. I'm sorry, thank you. So it is
a long day.
What did you say?
Off of Alaska, so it was U.S. territory.
Yeah.
Great. Well, wait. No, it was U.S. territory, but it wasn't even a state yet.
Right.
No, Alaska was not.
Just a territory, right? Yes, it was a territory. So it was probably, safe, like, as opposed to probably like San Francisco or something. Right. Yeah.
So Midland and the Coral Sea would allow the United States to sort of start a different strategy rather than just kind of losing their butts and moving backwards and trying to prevent the Japanese. They sort of stopped the Japanese extent of aggression, and now it's time to turn around. But the question is, how do we put pressure back on Japan when, if you ever look, and again, I'll put a map up, right? The South Pacific is just this massive island.
Sea.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's just shape. Yeah.
And so we would employ a strategy that many of you might remember called island hopping. And there were 2 paths, right? I think one came out of the Battle of the Coral Sea from Australia towards Japan, and the other from kind of where Midway was, from the east west towards Japan. And eventually we would, kind of hop, skip, and jump and bear down on Japan, which will bring us to that decision.
Right.
Roosevelt passes away, Truman becomes president, and then he gets news of a weapon. Right?
Well, I was just going to say, why did they choose certain islands? Well, they chose certain islands because they have runways.
Japan?
No, the U.S. as we hopped. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
But the U.S. chose certain islands because generally they had a runway. And so it could be used in the attack. And so they would literally skip over islands that had Japanese troops on them.
Yeah.
And some of those Japanese troops, they say, didn't realize the war was over for years after the war.
Right. There's that famous story of the guy. It was like the 1970s or something when
like
they got
30 years later. Yeah. And then I was always heard too that, and you probably know better than I do, that part of the reason for the island hopping and starting, people were, why don't you just bomb Japan?
Yeah.
But there were so many troops and war material in Southeast Asia all the way to the islands that by bombing Japan, you wouldn't have ended the war. You would have just put them outflanked.
And let's be honest, we were bombing the absolute daylights out of Japan.
Towards the end,
from 1942, we began bombing Tokyo, firebombing Tokyo. Japan was primarily a wooden country.
Yeah.
And so their metropolitan areas were not iron and steel. They were wooden. Yeah. So when we firebombed countries, and we did it throughout the war, we literally did it from 1942 all the way into 1945. So it wasn't like we weren't bombing Japan. We're constantly bombing Japan. We didn't have the bomb.
Right. Well, and so a couple things on that. One, I think it's important to say that why Coral Sea and Midway were big battles were because of the destruction of Japanese aircraft carriers. Mm-hmm. And so that was
good point.
That was a big part of why we could then push back and but also another big important battle, and it's another movie, is the Doolittle Raiders. Right. We as a country said we have to show we can get to them.
Yeah.
And even though we at that point weren't making advancements towards them, and those pilots landed in China,
like just basically ran out of fuel.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and that set a tone. I mean, again, it's kind of hard to say it this way because it does sound pretty brutal, but like when you can't do much to stop the Japanese advance except burn their towns to the ground. Mm-hmm. You talk about total war.
Right.
And that's exactly what
it's the same war that's been engulfing Europe now. I mean, the Germans are attempting to sway, and that's the goal was, I believe, right, if you convince the Japanese people their government is not doing the war well, that they will eventually overturn the government.
Right.
But it does not work. And fighting Japan clearly is a different enemy.
Yeah, they were going to fight till the last man standing.
Right, which is a whole, we'll get that in a second. So the I'm a Puppet campaign, 42, which I think is also Jones, like Stalingrad, the Eastern Front flips.
Yes. Yeah, so you get Germany pushing into the Soviet Union. Hitler could not defeat Britain, so he has decided that now I've got to do something else. Mm-hmm. And again, reference back to the last episode, check out what Napoleon did when he couldn't defeat Britain. In our episode a few times ago.
I'm sorry. Have you guys ever heard of a comedian called Eddie Izzard?
Who?
Eddie Izzard.
I am.
He does a bit where he does this, where he compares Napoleon and Hitler, and he talks about trouncing into Russia. And it's cold.
Yeah.
it's classic. Have you ever watched it?
Yeah. I mean, and the Russian winner or the Soviet winner at this point is definitely an ally to the Soviets.
Yes. They've always used it to their advantage.
And they have vodka, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to remember that in both wars, the Soviets, in this case, the Russians in World War I, were not afraid to burn down towns. We're not afraid. They literally, in World War I, the scorched earth policy, again, from another episode, they burned down towns, crops, shot cattle, all that kind of stuff. During World War II, 20 years later, they said, maybe we can move these. So let's move the herds of cattle instead of killing them. Let's move the factories instead of burning them down. And so they did all of that. To get all of that to the east of Moscow. But once kind of Germany got to that Leningrad and Moscow line, that's when that winter hit. That's when the Germans started to bog down a little bit. And the Russians were able to dig in.
The casualties on both sides are just
tremendous,
staggering.
Unbelievable.
The Soviets, I mean, just throwing person after person.
And that would be one thing, I think, as a military leader for most countries, where they would say Stalin wasn't very smart, because his answer was literally just throw more people at the front line.
To be fair, wasn't Russia kind of used to that in wars, though?
That's how they've always fought.
They're devastating every time.
You go back, Susie, all the way to like the Crimean War, right, in the mid 18th, 19th century. That's always been their advantage, right? We talked about this again, that they were usually industrial, in terms of industrialization, behind right, the rest of Europe. So they didn't necessarily have the technology, the weaponry, the advanced sort of warfare techniques. The Tsar, up until 1917, was the last state leader to still be leading troops in war. Right? We haven't turned it over to professional generals yet. The Russians are late at that. So, I mean, World War I is still fought old style. World War II, the Russians have caught up industrially, so their technology is great, but it's the same as the Germans, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at the Stalingrad and Leningrad, I mean, they basically become sieges where the Germans surround the city and the Russians just hunker down, and attempt to, I mean, like 300 days, 900 days.
It was long.
One of them's 3
months.
years, one of them's 1 year. But I mean, the Russians, like you just said, they're willing to basically do anything.
Number of lives don't matter.
Yeah, and to sacrifice their own people, their own territory, their own, I mean, to save Mother Russia, right? In this case, Soviet Union. So it's successful ultimately.
Yeah, it is. And this is where the turning point on the Eastern Front starts.
Yeah.
And if you guys remember from the last episode, we talked about the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel in North Africa, and the British and Americans finally pushing them out of North Africa, fighting up the boot of Italy. And Italy's a horrible place to fight because it's so rugged, and they really never push out of North Italy.
But there's all sorts of great fight.
And then Stalin is finally going to get his second front like he wants it, and that's D-Day.
But it's not where he wants it.
But it's not that long, right?
He's been at, and he thought maybe, well, okay, Italy. And then, it's interesting. We should probably mention this about Italy too.
Oh, here we go.
The Mussolini was arrested.
Well, I was going to say, so the story for Italy, right, is, and again, there are so many anecdotes, and I don't know if they're real. Someone's got to look this up, but I know this. I heard this somewhere, and I assume it's a legitimate source. I don't typically just make crap up. When Hitler knew, right, that North Africa had fallen and that the Allies were going to come into what you called, what is the soft underbelly of Europe, which is either south of France or Italy. Yeah. There were, I mean, he had it shored up, right? It was not an easy, fight. I mean, the Germans had, and the Italians, right, had really sort of created a giant wall. And the story I heard was that the Allies had to create a sense that there may be possibly two modes of entry, right? You either come in like through the boot, or you come into like Sardinia, right? The big island off Italy. And so you kind of land mid-Italy or you land southern Italy. Right. And the story I heard is that, it was all a little bit of subterfuge, right? They took a soldier who had died of pneumonia. So it looked like he had water in his lungs, put him like papers that showed him like an encryptor or a map-make code sender or something with a little note that says something like, when I get home, I'll send you sardines or something. The Germans hopefully then would take it that the invasion would be in Sardinia. They dumped his body in like a sea lane. The Germans fish it out. And therefore, they don't all of a sudden, abandon southern Italy, but they move just enough troops to mid-Italy to kind of go, all right, the Allies come up the south. But they never quite take it. It is a 3-year battle. And during the time, right, the Italians do turn on Mussolini. First he's arrested, and then he escapes.
Well, Hitler had to redirect German troops to Italy.
To save him from prison.
Yeah, and Italy, remember, has already kind of shown themselves to be the weakest part of the Axis.
For sure.
Right? They in Yugoslavia and parts of sort of the Balkans, they haven't done a very good job. They're falling apart in Albania and Greece. Never took Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Right. Never really
standards.
Right. So after he's arrested.
You mentioned that last time. Yeah.
Right. And after he's arrested, clearly, the Germans are directed, but then he escapes for a small period, right?
Hitler actually flew in a small garrison of troops, and they saved him from like a mountain. It might have even been a home he was imprisoned in.
Yeah.
And
what is that battle? There's
they set up a puppet government.
Yeah, but it's like a really famous battle in northern Italy. God, we're going to look it up. All right.
I can't name this. Yeah, that's a good one.
It's really like a hilltop.
Yeah.
They're fighting tooth and nail, right?
Yeah, to get Mussolini. But just I want to not back up really, but the invasion of Italy was Operation Husky.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, those are important to know. I think. Yeah. So Hitler does come in. Mussolini is freed temporarily. I think goes to Milan, and then where he is rearrested, right, by the Italians.
That's what I love. I love that part. I don't know. Maybe I should be careful about saying I love that part, but. The people,
dark underbelly,
the people of Italy, right? They're so finally frustrated with them. They just storm the capital. They literally pulled him out in the street and killed him.
Yeah, and his girlfriend. They had a little sort of kangaroo trial where they're guilty. They strung him up by his heels, slit his throat, and left him hanging, and his girlfriend in the town square.
The one really interesting part of this, and I think this is fascinating, is that after Hitler got him out of that prison and he put him in Milan or whatever small town it was, he was running a puppet Italian government. Mussolini was. Hitler allowed him to still be El Duce, allowed him to have some form of dignity
Interesting.
until they string him
until
up.
they said enough of that.
So the same didn't really last very
Until
well.
I think that's fascinating. And the reason I think that's fascinating is it shows that Hitler maybe didn't have too many true friends, but Mussolini was one of them, and he was willing to try to allow him to be dignified.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it also, everyone goes D-Day, right? D-Day is a turning point. Italy was clear at the beginning.
Yeah.
It then allowed another Allied invasion of southern France. Remember, because half of France at this point, well, all of France had been occupied, but the southern part had become a puppet Nazi state called the Vichy. And the Allies land, so they got Italy, and they're going up that way, they're fighting, and then they're coming up the south of France, basically, Nice, Marseille, Marseille, and they're moving up. So there's two fronts now.
Right.
And at that point, it's really only that sort of northwestern side of Europe that we now have to invade, which is going to set up D-Day.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of great stories.
Yeah, which, obviously the Allied invasion of northern France or Normandy from Great Britain.
Bye-bye.
Well, of course, they bombed the United States, if that's what you're referring to.
I think we always refer anything United States.
I didn't know what I was being cute for there. The entire German Atlantic Wall surrounded, or what's the right word? It completely covered all of northern France. And so the question was, if we choose France, which did piss Stalin off. Stalin really wanted Greece, or he wanted the Baltics. He wanted something else than that. But
I'm sorry.
Go.
I would love to know, right? Because we always teach the fact that what Russia is always looking for is a warm water port.
Sure.
So for them, Greece, the Balkans would represent then a part of their ability to kind of get to the Mediterranean. So I just thought of that. I mean,
it makes sense. Churchill and Roosevelt really were the ones who decided on the French strategy, but it was about figuring out how to penetrate that German wall. And so, it's actually pretty modern warfare. If you think about it, you bomb and then you invade on land once you soften up the forces. Right? I've been doing that since the Civil War, but the idea here was to bomb in multiple places and get the Germans kind of scurrying and figuring out where we might invade by land, and then maybe throwing a few curveballs at them.
Which is the Italian plan, the same kind of thing.
Exactly. It's where some of the most fascinating stories of D-Day come from the United States perspective, is the landing at Omaha Beach, right? Right there in Normandy, heavy resistance. And of course, if you watch the first 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan,
some of the most amazing filmmaking.
And I've heard that Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg attended one of the viewings for veterans, and that they were upset because they thought that film was a failure, and the veterans were leaving saying, no, I started to smell it, because all their other senses were awake.
Yeah. The best is a bit wrong word. The most realistic D-Day film.
Yeah,
action.
Absolutely think so. I mean, at least according to people that know better than me, for sure.
Right.
But there were, it's interesting because that's obviously the most famous story. I actually peed in the bathroom by a guy who said that, literally just turned to me and he goes, "Do you know what today is?" And I was like, "It's December, or was it June? Right? June 6th. And he said, "I was there." And I was like, I'm a history teacher, so I actually know what you're talking about. Yeah. And he was kind of surprised because I think he thought I was some young dummy. But anyway. I was at a wedding. I was at a wedding. This is literally just rolled up to a urinal, and this guy starts talking to me. And it was fascinating. He was there. He was at Omaha Beach.
Wow.
And I was like, it's kind of a miracle that you're alive. And he was like, "Tell me about it."
Yeah.
It was pretty cool. It was pretty
So that opens up then a third flank.
Yes.
Right.
So that then opens up that whole thing. There were other landings in France that were much easier, by the way, and I think we sometimes forget to tell that part.
Large, or
but the idea, I mean, gosh, what was it, guys? Months. We cut through France and Belgium and the Netherlands and Luxembourg. I mean, that was so the right move. If you could just get into northern France, because Germany clearly had screwed up with that Eastern Front, and I think that opened us up big time.
Right. And then so basically by 1944, right, when the Allies have landed and they fight tooth and nail. I mean, it's not like they land and the war is over.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, they land and now they are fighting
from town to town,
and it basically becomes a race between the Soviets and the U.S. and the Allies to Berlin.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right. I mean, we're just slowly pinching them in.
They both want to get there first.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
to the victor go the spoils.
Right.
Right. So there's a race, but it leads to all sorts of sort of epic battles, like, when you talk about the
Battle of the Bulge.
Battle of the Bulge, liberation of Paris, right? When
Right.
the Germans are eventually trying to throw the Bulge.
Yeah.
I mean,
everything at them. Yeah. So the Battle of the Bulge, and I used to teach U.S. history, don't anymore, haven't for a long time. But my first couple of years of teaching, I had this sweet old couple that would come and they'd talk to my kids, and he fought in the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh, wow.
She was a nurse, and they met in a medic tent behind the lines.
wow.
He would start with his back towards the kids when he talked to them, and he would take out his helmet and put it on, and he would turn around, and it had a bullet hole inside of it. Right. And that's how he started.
Yeah.
Right. And kids were immediately just like, oh my gosh, and so into it. But one of the things he talked about, he pulled out a Hitler Youth knife. If you don't know anything about the Hitler Youth, Hitler is kind of like the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts. They trained kids, and when you were finished, you got this Hitler Youth knife, and any soldier that went through the program kept it on their person.
Yeah.
And he told the kids it was them or me, it was him or me. And he kept that knife after that confrontation, and he was riveting. And then you get her talking about what she saw behind the lines of that medical hospital. But the Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last opportunity to really try to turn the tide on the Western Front. He punched through, not through. He made a huge bulge in the line.
The bulge. Yeah.
Didn't get through the line, but punched clear back into France. And then the U.S. and British and probably a few Canadians turn that tide.
And that really is kind of like Hitler's last stand.
Yeah,
I mean, it really was.
Right, and they're closing in, right? And so the key here, go ahead.
Well, so the Band of Brothers too, guys. I think that's and I know I keep talking about movies,
history of media,
but they're
absolutely.
But watch the Band of Brothers, because
it's amazing.
They show you the American troops working through France. They show you Bastogne and the Battle of the Bulge, and those guys, digging out holes and bombs hitting in tops of trees and just all the stuff that was you can't even imagine. You can't even imagine.
Yeah, which I think those are great, totally great stories.
I've always wondered how true the story is when the Elbe River, where the Soviet troops coming from the east and the Americans and I think maybe the Canadians or the British coming from the west, and they saw each other across the river and they realized they'd done it.
Yeah.
And they partied like crazy.
Right. They built a bridge across like a Soviet bridge.
And of course, the irony of that is that the next time Allied and Soviet, at least, our American and British and Soviet troops met each other, and you're talking about the potential to destroy the entire world, but they partied that night. And while their leaders were forming what would become the Cold War and put us at odds with each other for the next several decades, it's super. It kind of makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up just a little bit when I think about it.
Would you get? I mean, it's those great sort of moments in history where you're like, God, what happened? But in a nutshell, though, the Soviets beat the West to Berlin, and they get like a week ahead of time or something, right? All sorts of horror stories, right? The way the Russians are looking now for their pound of flesh, right? For the death toll. And Berlin is just ransacked and people are just sort of ravaged. But also along the way, right? The West, and the Soviets discover the concentration camps. They discover all sorts of, behind the lines use of people as, basically industrial slaves. I mean, you find all of those sort of horrors of the war begin to become evident. And the war then is over, right? With VE Day in Europe, victory over Europe, right? When Hitler in April commits suicide with his girlfriend, the bunker story, right? Eva Braun. And now people think the war is over, but in reality, the war in Europe is over. And a lot of those troops who were fighting because the war, like you said last time, the goal had been to end it in Europe first.
Yeah.
So when the war is over in Europe, a lot of those troops didn't come home.
Yeah.
But they
moved to the Pacific. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's a great point. And at those times, World War I, World War II, you didn't go for a tour, right? You didn't, Vietnam.
There until it was over.
Yeah, you were there until it was over. So, like both my grandfathers I think went in 41 and were there till 44 or 45.
Until it was over.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Interesting dynamic in the Pacific, though, at that point, because Roosevelt passed away and Roosevelt succeeded by Truman, which Truman just vice president for a couple of months, I think.
Give him hell hair.
Yeah.
So isn't it like really rapid too? Like Berlin falls, isn't it April? Roosevelt dies in April.
Yeah,
Like,
right
it's
in
like
there.
there's boom, it's boom. But Churchill was ousted, right? Because you have that last conference, right, where they're trying to figure out what the War in the Pacific is going to look like Stalin, and Stalin is the only remaining figure from the original,
maybe Potsdam, right?
Potsdam, right?
Yeah,
so then
Potsdam.
that's it. Well, he's the only one left, and now he's kind of got all the cards. As well.
Wouldn't it have been interesting if they all would have survived or remained in office? And would the Cold War, and I know it's very hypothetical, but would it have been?
But it's a great what if.
Roosevelt's relationship with Stalin, and I think Churchill's relationship with Stalin, was such that they could always pet him and calm him down. And I don't think Truman had that in him.
Right.
Good old Missouri boy.
When Stalin pounded his fist, Truman pounded his fist back. Because Potsdam's a perfect transition.
Example. Yeah.
Right? Because it was at Potsdam that Roosevelt and Churchill clearly knew the United States had adopted or invented the atomic bomb.
Right.
And when Stalin found out,
Truman.
I'm sorry,
Truman
and Churchill. And when
he finds out, like, during the conference.
Stalin found out at the conference, and realized clearly, you guys knew. Why didn't I know? And that's actually where Stalin denies his promise from Yalta to allow for free elections in Europe after the war, which sets up the Cold War.
To possession, possession is 9/10 of the laws, right?
Exactly
I've got a million troops here.
Right. So at that point, though, so Europe's defeated, and now we're island hopping closer and closer to the island, the main island of Japan.
And as Truman takes the presidency, and famously did not know as he took the presidency that we were working on something called the atomic bomb, learned shortly after the fact that we had it, he now had a decision to make. Because we were close, Okinawa and Iwo Jima were the last two battles before what would have been a land invasion of Japan. And the military leaders were telling Truman, this invasion of Japan, they're not going to stop. We've tried negotiations, we've tried concessions, they're not going to stop.
Bombing them for years.
This next battle could be 100,000 American lives.
Oh, at least I would think.
That was kind of the guess.
Absolutely.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Shmoyda, but Okinawa, Iwo Jima, those battles were near, if not as big land invasions as D-Day.
Oh yeah, they were
huge.
They were huge land
and took forever. I mean, they were hardcore, hand-to-hand mountainous. Japanese were dug in. They were
kamikazes by that point. You probably heard the word kamikazes before. By that point in the war, the Japanese were desperate. Kamikazes.
But they've been pushed all the way back up. Now they're like concentrated at like these last three spots.
Yes. Yeah. And so Truman, with that choice, as we all know, decided in August to use the atomic bomb to put an end to the war.
Which I also always had read and told that it's not only is it to save American lives, clearly, but it's also right to send a message. I mean, that the war is coming to an end, that, if we drop this and film it and then make sure everybody sees it, then the world will sort of be, I mean, I could be wrong, but that's why I've always, sort of read that side of it, that it's a little bit two-sided.
One suggestion was to not use it on people.
Right.
And drop it in the ocean. Right. And watch what it does.
Right.
And that might be enough to end it.
Right.
And of course, they were looking at millions of dollars that it took to create the one bomb. And they're like, we're not dropping it in the ocean. We're not going to do that.
But you knew you were going to kill civilians.
You knew you were going to kill civilians. No one knew how much. If you ever want to know how much they knew in World War II about the atomic bomb, you just have to go, 8 years or so after the war. They were still testing it.
Right.
And sending soldiers in after they tested the bomb.
And the amazing thing, they're testing it like in Nevada.
Right. In Nevada, right. It wasn't like Siberia.
You could see the mushroom cloud from Las Vegas.
Yeah.
You're clearly not aware yet.
Yes.
But also, to not kind of wrap it up, that Tokyo had been bombed so completely that they chose not to bomb Tokyo because you wouldn't have seen the effect of the bomb.
There were like 38 cities in Japan.
Right.
I mean, imagine 38 cities around the United States being basically burned to the ground.
Right.
So I think that's pretty much
the two that they eventually chose, right? Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been relatively untouched.
Well, Hiroshima was the first.
Right.
And part of the dynamic here, too, is that we'd been begging Stalin, okay, you've wanted our help. You've wanted our help. We want your help. Come into Asia and help us in the war.
What a two-front war in Japan.
But now all of a sudden, we're not really sure we want the Soviets, because by that point in time, it's August. April was when the war in Europe was over. we saw what Stalin was doing in Germany,
basically just keeping his troops, taking all of Eastern Europe and making it a communist satellite,
creating
Making
his zone.
that zone.
Yeah. And we realize immediately when he heads, interestingly, the fastest movement of Russian troops was after August 6th, that first bomb. And so what's super controversial about this is that the second bomb was only 3 days later. Was the second bomb meant to stop Stalin from advancing? So, it's controversial enough to think about dropping a bomb. You don't know what damage it will do, but then hurrying a second one to try to slow down the Soviets. Now that you don't want them involved, after asking them to be involved, it's very kind of clustery at that point in time.
To give you guys kind of an idea, and correct me because you guys have both seen this too, but there's maybe something we could put on the show. But when that atomic bomb hit Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the first mile was complete devastation. And then like the next 3 miles were almost total devastation. And then out to, I think it was 5 miles with those first bombs, where there was noticeable damage. And in both cities, 70,000 people were killed just from the dropping of the bomb, approximately. And then lots of other people obviously died later from radiation burns.
It took decades to learn the genetic effects that generations to come would have. Even
in both cities, they didn't just choose, correct me here, guys, those were cities that had some military significance, whether it was weapon building or industrial factories. They didn't just say, hey, let's pick this city that has no relevance.
But you were right, there weren't many left.
Right.
There really weren't many choices left. Yeah, you're right about that part of it.
So the bomb is dropped. They don't think we have a second one.
Right.
Basically, we do.
I don't know.
They choose not to.
They don't surrender after the first one.
They did not surrender, but
they don't believe the fact that we have another one to drop.
That, and a lot of people speculate, like, we didn't know what we had dropped on them.
Oh, absolutely.
So how could 3 days be enough for them to say?
Right. Oh no, yeah.
Right. So it is kind of interesting. And I'm not blaming the United States, and I'm not defending it. I'm just saying it's a super first time we ever did something like that kind of a thing. It's really worth looking at.
First time anybody.
The only time, right? The only time.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
So we got 1945 August, right? 45, the war is over.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they finally signed in September. But
is that what it is? Yeah. On the USS Missouri.
Right.
MacArthur.
You get the
MacArthur.
Yeah, again, right. Yep. And we finally get the end of the war. But I think the important thing, and we'll kind of set it up here, I think, for another episode, though, is the end of that war sets the tone for the next 70 years of sort of international politics, and how you three of us all raised, and probably a lot of you out there watching. I mean, we are children of the Cold War, right? And so it is the events directly following World War II, right, that are going to really sort of set the tone on it. I mean, I think the atomic bomb is huge, which is our arms race. Yeah. But you also have, I mean, the idea of the Holocaust, right? Of the, and you read all sorts of different numbers up to, 11 or 12 million, right? The Germans were not only, executing Jews, but it was anybody that did not fit, right? Their sort of German idea of what it meant to be.
Jeff, if I can, just historically, you can look historically over and over again where leaders have pushed certain people out of their country.
Scapegoats.
And it has affected them economically. It has affected them intellectually. I mean, think about this. A German Jewish man helped us create the atomic bomb that helped win the war.
Well, the Holocaust was, in essence, the last pogrom, which was a series of stories like that, where countries have decided that Jewish people were not allowed or accepted and shoved them out of the country. And that's in essence what the Holocaust at least began as. It got much worse.
The Jews have taken a brunt of a lot of things. But if you look back, I mean, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella pushed the Muslims out. Send Columbus to
which the whole
over and over and over,
podcast.
Over and over and over.
Well, the Holocaust alone should probably be a podcast,
right? But you discover the horrors of the Holocaust, right? Europe is completely destroyed, right?
Yes,
I mean, this is 2 wars in 20 years that have just infrastructure.
A generation of men gone.
Yeah, the death toll. I mean, 20 million soldiers and 40 million, or 50 million civilians.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so much weighted towards civilian deaths because of the bombing of all of the West was, Dresden and the Allies did just as much carpet bombing, not carpet bombing, but firebombing of Europe as anybody did.
And the interesting thing, like 25 or 30 million of those were Russians or Soviets.
Again,
Just
alone.
Soviets.
So, you have an entire sort of, generation that is, again, just shell shocked, right? Europe is obliterated. And once again, right, it's going to set the United States up because, we have not taken a direct sort of geographic hit.
Yeah.
Our industry is still alive. We're able to kind of bounce back. And we will talk about that clearly with sort of all sorts of, economic plans. But really what it sets up is the fact that we just talked about, right? Russia, Soviet Union, has taken basically the zone from Poland straight all the way down to Yugoslavia, right? And they create the Warsaw Pact out of it, of satellite states.
And NATO comes first, but yes.
Right. But eventually, right, exactly. But eventually they're going to have a sphere of Soviet influence and a metaphoric wall, right, that will drop right down. Where actually Churchill again makes that speech at a college in Missouri,
Westminster College,
right, where he calls it an iron wall. Again, not that we're trying to locate ourselves here.
Well, you have cigar, you have the different trials of the war criminals that are very public.
Nuremberg
trials.
The Japanese war criminal. Yeah, the very fact that you put people on trial for a war crime is a new concept because it becomes, what is it, a crime against humanity?
Yeah.
So, you've always had this sense, if I'm not wrong, and you probably have a better sense of this in terms of U.S. history, that there is a certain expectation, right, that you make decisions that are hard, that people die, that, you follow the chain of command. But when the World War II is over, the scale of these atrocities are so great that somebody has to own the responsibility for that.
Well, like you said, the map of Europe has changed. The East versus West, the Soviets, the nuclear threat, the war of Asia is changing too, by the way.
For sure.
You have,
and we're going to have with the war in China.
But the communist revolution in China is going to create Taiwan as a separate sort of country, but not a separate country, which is very strange. You can have the same thing in Korea with North and South Korea, nuclear threat all around. And it's going to cause us after the war to redefine the rules of war, right? We're going to sit down. The Geneva Convention is huge for saying, okay, you cannot pick these people and, penalize them the way the Holocaust did. You cannot put people in the media as war criminals. You cannot, atomic bomb. It's just weird how we begin to redefine what war should be.
Well, and now the arms race, instead of tanks, ships, planes, becomes atomic bombs.
Sure.
And you get the United States and the Soviet Union, who can all blow up the world more than, which
will be our next podcast.
Right.
But you also end up with the United Nations. Right. So another now international organization that is going to attempt once again to kind of but another
this time with U.S.
The U.S. is going to join, and it's actually headquartered in New York.
Yeah.
So clearly a different ending for World War II or World War I. We do end the idea of a world war. We're going to have a whole new situation, from proxy wars that can come along. But I think, hopefully for you guys, you see that we kind of covered the war here.
Yeah.
It's somebody's turn.
I think it's Mr. Schmoyder's turn.
Who you want to have a drink with?
Who do I want to have a drink with in this? So, I'm a little bit biased as an American history guy, but it has to be FDR.
Okay.
There's just so much there. And it could be Depression, but it could be World War II as well, right? The thing that we didn't mention here that I think is super interesting is the whole dynamic in the United States of moving from Roosevelt sort of dipping his toe in the water with Keynesian economics, if you remember our Great Depression episode, to full board deficit spending, full on. We were funding 2 entire wars at the same time. We were absolutely deficit spending. We were at like 0 unemployment by that point in time. And we would bounce so hard into an economic boom that would last for really, give or take a couple of decades.
I would say 20 years, yeah.
And Roosevelt was the guy that went from super reluctant to do all that to full on into it, and then kind of died before he could see it all through. And I'd love to know how, not just that, but how he handled doing that in a wheelchair.
Right.
And
with
how he handled it with his relationship with Eleanor, which was not a good relationship.
Clearly.
Right? It was a working relationship at best.
Yeah.
There's just
I mean,
so
considering
much.
the fact that he died in a hotel with his girlfriend.
Right.
Right.
Well, and like
who he had for years. I mean, it wasn't like a secret.
And like Churchill,
Yeah.
I'm sure that Roosevelt would have several drinks to explain all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
It's a good call. It's a good one.
That'd be a good.
No. Yeah. There's a lot.
Also, the whole idea of a 4-term president. You had to kind of wonder if he would look
He's
back
the
now and go,
There's an
that
amendment
wasn't
created.
the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an amendment created because of him.
Yeah. So I wonder if he looked back if he thought it was a good thing or not.
Well, I think the country thought it was a good thing.
Yeah.
Because how do you're fighting through the Depression, which isn't a war, but it's a fight, right? And then into the war period, and you get off the horse that's taking you there,
Right.
And so,
Which is interesting.
Wow.
so
Are we done?
It's like,
Well,
all of a sudden, I'm like,
there's-
sweating.
There's
Like,
a few. I mean, there's so much stuff.
so we
There's so
could
much stuff
go
there.
into
I
the
know.
Holocaust next time. We could go Cold War next
Yeah.
time.
Cold War. I don't
Yeah,
know. What are we talking about?
There again. I'll say again. At some point, we'll jump backwards, but I don't really even know
This
where
might
to
be-
stop.
But
I
this
don't
might
know
be
where
the
to stop
time.
to do it.
This might be
Maybe.
a good time to kind of
We
jump
could
back.
do that.
All right.
I mean,
Let us know what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah, please drop a comment, like, share, follow. We love it. Spread the news. Give everybody you know access to our podcast and have them follow as well.
Yep. And if you're not following on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all that, we're out there, and some of the stuff we're putting out there is kind of fun too.
We really appreciate all of your assistance.
Absolutely. Class dismissed.
Class dismissed.
Thanks.